May 40 here. So we've had a president who spent much of the last 3.5 years a little bit out of it or a lot out of it. All right, we have a senile president of the United States. And if your life isn't all about politics, like how would you even know? On what basis would you say that a President Biden who had more of his faculties would be better for the country? I just don't see that, right? There are very few things that we absolutely depend upon a president of the United States to do. And to me, that we have a senile president of the United States who's not really capable of very much, it is revelatory regarding the overall power of system and structure compared to the power of the individual and of personality. Right? For the average bloke, it makes absolutely no difference that the president has spent much of the last 3.5 years kind of checked out. At what basis, practically, specifically, particularly, would you say that the United States would be in a better position right now if you had a president of the United States who was not senile? I'm just not seeing it. Maybe there are arguments and there are certain situations where you want to have a president who's there, but it's hard to see them.
Worse than Secret Service originally let on. The Washington Post is reporting that to get important urgent messages about Mr. Crooks to the agency, a local commander had to pick up his cell phone and call a state trooper who would then tell the Secret Service, like a game of telephone tag. This happened 3 times that afternoon, including when a local counter sniper radioed about a young white male lurking near the AGR building at about 5:42, and that they had then lost sight of him. It even happened when 30 seconds before Trump was shot, a local officer radioed the command center that the shooter was on the roof and armed. Well, that message never got to the Secret Service command post. Joining me now, Frank Loveridge, former Secret Service special agent in charge. Frank, now, apparently in Butler, Pennsylvania, cell service can be quite spotty, and in some instances, it did not work at all. So how does the Secret Service usually set up a command post that is so far from the local police, especially in those more rural areas where the cell service isn't great?
Well, Laura, let me thank you for having me on tonight. First thing I want to tell you is the proper protocols is to have one command post, a security room in which all assets are in that room with radios ready to transfer any information that might be critical. So we get situational awareness real time. And that didn't happen. Sensitive and critical information should never be passed on a cell phone because of one thing. When you're not paying attention, when you're typing a message, sending it and getting it to someone that has to pull it up and read it, that's too much of a delay in time when you have critical information that needs to be passed. And it's a common practice to make sure that everyone's there in that command post to pass that information on.
All right, so everyone's used to like seeing Secret Service with their earpieces. And that's what we see. We say, oh, we feel better when we see people with earpieces because we feel like they're getting information. But it all can't come in at once, correct? It has to be funneled through one channel.
It does.
But if it's not, network, then what happens?
Well, our network is an encrypted network, and it's internal.
Okay, this just reminds me, so much of life is appearance, all right? Because the Secret Service has those earpieces in. All right, you think that they know what's going on. And if people just dress professionally and act professionally, you assume that they are professional. So much of how people react to us is simply based on how we look. And that has a significant deterrent effect because people would much rather attack a space where there does not appear to be professional security. And so the Secret Service, with keeping everyone in suits and keeping everyone with their earpieces in, they give the impression that they know what they're doing. And that's probably deterred a lot of attacks, even though the lack of successful presidential assassination since 1963 probably has more to do with luck than with any other factor.
We're not getting information passed from the locals. That's why we depend on them to pass the information to us at one central point. Hey, look, at 4:26 p.m., we knew this guy was a special interest. And then at 5:42 p.m., it basically became more important to see him because he's using a rangefinder now to sight towards the stage. So the Secret Service should have had information, or even our counter snipers. The U.S. Secret Service counter snipers and the local counter snipers were not communicating, according to acting director Ron Rowe. So that's a huge problem and breakdown on that. And then what happened is we lost the individual for 20 minutes.
Well, Frank, I have to just share this issue with the text messages, which I just only saw. They were trying to text out a photo of Crooks, and that wouldn't go through at about 5:47. It says, units be advised, internet and cell service is down. Another officer on that channel said a minute later, your picture is probably not going to go through because I don't have any service. That was a sheriff's deputy at 5:49. Wow.
That's why we don't rely on that. We don't rely on cell phone coverage because you can't trust it. You need to get it over the radio and get it to the people that need it quickly.
Well, Frank, there are so many more questions, and it's very curious that we haven't gotten answers. Weeks later, still, we're waiting for them. Frank, great to see you. Thank you.
Okay, but if we want to be literal and you say, give me a name, 40, give me a name, who is running the country right now? All right, that person is Jeff Zients, right? He is the chief of staff, and he is a formidably capable person. All right, he ran Joe Biden's, he was Joe Biden's COVID czar, and I think Joe Biden did a pretty good job with regard to COVID. But this is the person who's the
do something else, or you haven't thought that far in advance?
Well, when President Biden gets reelected.
So it's a good thing that you haven't heard of him. I mean, it reflects well on him. Unlike Ron Klain, this guy does not need to be the center of attention. All right, he comes from a business management background, and he is just really good at running things, and he's really good, apparently, at recognizing where he doesn't know stuff. But did you know Jeff Zients was the chief of staff? All right, he is probably the most powerful person in the United States right now, given that Joe Biden's not really with it. So he's been in his position for about 18 months. He's absolutely nothing like his more showboating, attention-seeking predecessor, Ron Klain. All right, Ron Klain was very friendly with the more progressive side of the Democratic Party. Right, Jeff Zients, he is much friendlier with business. He is much more politically moderate. He's got a business-like approach. He comes from a background as a management consultant. Right, you have a White House that's governed more by committee and process than by Ron Klain's iron fist. I would have to think that overall that's going to be an advantage. There are very few situations in life where having a brilliant leader is decisive, right? Most battles are simply settled by who has the superior structure and resources that they can bring to bear. Now, Napoleon, more than any other general of which we know, was able to win battles by his sheer brilliance, but that's pretty rare, right? It's usually not the most brilliant National Football League head coach strategist during a particular game who wins. Usually it's the team with the best talent, right? And so Jeff Zients has very little political experience, and he listens to people, so his aides feel more empowered and heard, right? He's not as decisive as Ron Klain, right? He doesn't go around throwing the F-bombs. He doesn't talk just for the sake of talking. And he doesn't micromanage, right? Ron Klain would micromanage. He would line edit, even low-profile speeches and press releases. Jeff Zients doesn't meddle. He's demanding. He's efficient, but he doesn't meddle, right? Ron Klain had the deeper relationship with the progressive wing of the party. Jeff Zients is more connected with the business community. He's more engaged with the business community. He's been influential in the big infrastructure and CHIPS bills that Joe Biden has signed. So Ron was opaque. Jeff was more clear. Jeff Zients just incredibly impressive man. However much you may disagree with his politics.
Look forward to the next month, the next quarter. We constantly renew 100-day plans of what our priorities are, how the president's going to spend his time.
Right, he's not exciting. He's not compelling. He's not charismatic. He doesn't need your attention. he's just really good at running stuff.
So Saturdays is usually 2/3 of the day at the office. I try to stay home on Sundays and work out of the house, but I'm successful maybe half the time.
So has the way you work in the White House changed much in light of COVID and Zoom? So when you first started at the White House under Obama, there wasn't really Zooming, and you couldn't really, you had to work, you typically had to come into the office. Is that the case now?
Well, the West Wing has been in the office from day one, even though, remember, day one was in the middle of the COVID crisis. I actually was helping to coordinate the response, so I know it well. But when you think about the people in the old executive office building or in other government buildings, they were not at work. And now, the White House compound is very...
So he dramatically improved office morale. He put a priority on office morale. And that's usually a pretty savvy move by someone who's running things. You want happy people working for you.
Much in person at work, but as many of you know and many of you have talked to me about, we don't yet have the return to work levels that we should have across the federal government. We're headed in the right direction, but that's an area we need to continue to focus on.
So very often...
All right, so this interview was conducted April 18, 2024.
People who wind up as chiefs of staff, like Mac, had a very close, long...
Did you know this guy? Did you know that this was the chief of staff? Because this guy has been the most important person in the world over the past year, 2 years, and you likely do not even know his name. And he doesn't need you to know his name. He doesn't need your attention. He doesn't need groupies. He's just very efficient.
Standing relationship of some type with the President of the United States. Not always the case. Jim Baker was an opponent of Ronald Reagan, actually, in many ways, you could argue. So you didn't have that close a personal relationship with Biden, so how did he pick you?
Well, good question. I do have colleagues who have been with the now president for decades, people like Mike Donilon, who's now the chief strategist on the campaign, was in the West Wing until recently. I did get to know the vice president fairly well, working relationship when I was at the NEC in particular, but before that when I was at the OMB too. I helped him I think, through his transition out of government. I think you were helpful too. Then we
I gave him advice to get into private equity. He didn't do that, but okay.
And then, he asked me to lead his transition, which was sort of a dream job in many ways. So I've gotten to know him well, but you're right, there are people who have had...
So I have to admit, this is a point that Richard Hanania makes many times. The Democrats seem to overwhelmingly have superior human capital, right? That they seem to have better educated, smarter people who rise to the top of our institutions.
A decade-long relationship. So we work well together. Obviously, I think he's an extraordinary leader, and we have a good rhythm going in terms of how we work.
So as you look at the presidency today and the president's biggest challenges, what would you say are the biggest challenges he has in front of him today?
Well, look, I mentioned it earlier. What goes into the Oval Office, there's no easy issue. There's no obvious opportunity. It's all hard stuff.
I just think it's cool that this guy doesn't need to aggrandize himself. He doesn't need to come across as more important than he is. You can just tell by this low-key way that he's speaking. He's not trying to impress you, right? It doesn't really matter to him, all right? He doesn't need to get the credit. Right. This is the type of personality who gets stuff done. This morning, the president took off for Philadelphia, and beforehand, we met twice. And one of the areas that is particularly timely right now is what's going on the Hill, both the reauthorization of the FISA legislation. That's a very important national security piece of legislation. And even more importantly, the bipartisan bill to fund national security, Israel, Ukraine. So I don't think talk radio has talked about this guy very much. He's not exciting. He's not compelling. He's not charismatic. All right. It's so much easier to understand what's going on around you in terms of stories and emotions. And Jeff Zients does not evoke intense emotions or easy stories. And so it's a lot easier to relate to world events through the prism of particular personalities. Donald Trump is a compelling personality. If you're on the left, you may well be attracted to Kamala Harris, but it's people like Jeff Zients who make the world run. All right, these are the people who get things done, and this bloke, he just does not seem particularly needy for credit, which I just think speaks so well of him. Just seems like a good bloke, and I just don't see why we would be in better shape if Joe Biden was more cognitively with it. Okay, so here is a very commonly held perspective on the distant right. All right, hard men create, what is it? Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. All right, this is a typical distant right perspective. Okay, here is a typical elite perspective. All right, Stefan Schubert. Right, he's an effective altruist and an academic, and he says, on the contrary, modern history is the history of the mutual reinforcement of the civilizing process and rapid economic growth. Right, that's an interesting perspective. Right, it's a good challenge. So who's right? I'm not gonna side with who's right, but there's nothing inherently free market about right-wing politics. All right, if you have high in-group identity, if you don't want members of an out-group in your community, all right, that will make you right-wing. But there's nothing inherently in the right-wing outlook that wants lower marginal tax rates, that wants free markets. All right, that's not an inherent part of right-wing identity. But what there is in right-wing identity is the notion that traditional ways of doing things are usually better than newfangled ways of organizing families, for example. And that means that traditionally men and women have separate roles, and the traditional conception of masculinity is a large part of what animates conservative embrace of the free market, right? Because there are not obvious associations between the free market and conservatism and the right wing, right? There's nothing inherent in conservatism and being right wing that is free market. But if you embrace special roles for men and special roles for women, then part of embracing special roles for men is that you are going to have more ease with some chaos, with unpredictability, with insecurity, and with the enormous amount of life that is not structured. Right? So the man steps up in the absence of appropriate structure, and when he sees there is no man, then he becomes the man. Right? So untrammeled laissez-faire, the free market, this is a very masculine way of looking at life. The free market brings with it the anti-structure that used to constitute life in older times, right? This is life outside of the disciplines and repressions of the buffered liberal modern identity. It accepts that we are all submerged in all sorts of forces that we do not understand and do not control, that we recognize that there are powers outside of us, that transcend our will, that upset our designs, that get in the way. And so the traditional perspective is porous, right? We recognize all these powers outside of us that are greater than us, and that we cannot create a buffered identity in the face of all sorts of powers that are greater than us, right? The liberal left, modern secular humanist enlightenment conception is that we can create a buffered identity and we can decide meaning, morality, purpose on our own, and through the sheer force of our rational powers, through the sheer application of our will, we can project a good path to follow through life. So from the liberal left perspective, this openness to the porous identity, that there are all sorts of forces outside of us that will subvert us, that will overflow and upset the best of our designs, all right? From a liberal left modern enlightenment perspective, this notion of outside forces that overpower us is kind of a relic of a medieval age of less enlightened people, and liberals see themselves in their superior enlightenment have overcome this. So the ultimate expression of the ordered liberal welfare state is perhaps communism, where everything is regulated, right? So perhaps communism is the ultimate symbol of Enlightenment rationalism, where all the economy, all of life is regulated by the communist structure. And by contrast of that, you've got the free market, which is an embodiment of the romantic counter-enlightenment, the recognition of the porous identity, that there are all these forces going on around us, that we would be foolish to deny that we can just create a buffered identity in the face of many forces that flow on around us that are considerably stronger than us. So Stefan Schubert here is articulating the liberal Enlightenment perspective that modern history is the history of the mutual reinforcement, the civilizing process, right? That's the liberalizing process, the leftist process, right? Because almost all of our means of cultural production are controlled by the left. And so that's one argument. All right, here's an interesting perspective. Peachy Keenan says, close family member and attorney, worked for Kamala Harris in the San Francisco District Attorney Office and still traumatized. Now, normally I wouldn't put much weight on individual anecdotes, right? I'm a man of structure. I'm a man of philosophical depth. I'm not a man who runs hither and thither based on stories. But this anecdote and these reports fit in with everything I understand, everything I know from my hours of research into Kamala Harris, that the essence of Kamala Harris is a deep insecurity which drives her, also leads her to freeze when she has to go off script. And so Peachy Keenan says, close family member and attorney, worked for Kamala Harris in the San Francisco District Attorney Office and is still traumatized. Everyone lived in terror of her. Everyone thought she was a disaster, a nincompoop, and a petty bitch. When she went on vacation, they could relax, and they dreaded her return. Another woman there worked for her in the Senate campaign, was a true believer, was treated so badly she quit law and is now 100% for Donald Trump. Pat Buchanan nailed it. What can be said for a man who would allow his home to be invaded by strangers who demand that they be fed, clothed, and housed, and granted the rights of the children, the firstborn? What can be said for a ruling elite that permits this to be done to the nation? Muslim voter fraud caused the United Kingdom to use stringent voter ID requirements in the recent general election for the first time in history. The real objection here is not to fraud, but the fact that it has defeated leftist Democrats. Well, anyway, the point is this is a wonderful opportunity for Muslims in the United Kingdom, but Muslims throughout the First World, all right, to make the case why Islamic immigration is good for natives. Right? This is the time. I don't know why nobody bothers to make this case. If massive Islamic immigration is good for the United Kingdom, then why aren't people making that case? What are the tangible, specific benefits that come with a large amount of Islamic immigration? How do those tangible benefits overcome the social dislocation and diminishment of social cohesion and social trust that happens when you bring an outgroup, particularly with a different religion that has had a long hostile relationship with Europe and Christianity, and you bring millions of those people into your land? Why isn't anyone making the case for Islamic immigration? Why isn't anyone making the case for African immigration, for Ugandan immigration, for Indian immigration? Right? Why aren't people out there for Pakistani immigration? I mean, Jews make the case for Jews. This has been a common trope among Jewish immigrants when they establish themselves in a land. They engage in public relations to make the case for why the presence of Jews is a good thing. Now, anecdotally, I hear all sorts of awful statistics about this and that immigration group, that some crimes such as carjacking are dominantly, one tiny African nation immigrants in Melbourne, Australia. All right, you hear all these anecdotes about how you've got various immigrant groups committing awful amounts of crime. Well, why not? Why don't these immigrant groups or people who support massive amounts of migration make a rational empirical case for bringing in immigrants?
Well, no one told them there's a hole in the stage. All right, speaking of this comics for Kamala thing, Raymond, I noticed that that Veep actress, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, she's promising to be extra involved in the Harris campaign.
But Laura, isn't she already involved? Yeah, I mean, her Veep character, Selena Meyer, was the leading cultural indicator for Kamala Harris's entire run. She prepared the way years ago.
Whatever we have in store cannot be known. But given time, it can be understood.
It is a reflection of our moment and our time, right? And present culture is the way we express how we're feeling about the moment.
I'm asking you to meet me at the station and join me as we board a train bound for a place called the future.
Laura,
so
it's like
eerie.
the Veep writers scripted. It's like they scripted every address Kamala Harris has ever recited. I mean, it's like prophecy. Watching it again is really scary. But I would stay as far away from this actress and Veep as I possibly could if I had anything to do with this campaign. I guess they missed the irony.
Well, Raymond, remember in the Atlantic magazine, they said today that it's her oddball charm. So it's like Elaine from Seinfeld. We should just go along. Yeah. It doesn't matter. We have serious, World War III, meltdown of the economy, millions of people here illegally, inner city crumbling. No, just oddball charm. That's all that matters. That's the TikTokization of America. Thank you very much.
Speaking of oddball, the second gentleman is facing scrutiny for his less than gentlemanly conduct. Over the weekend, Kamala Harris's husband, the man who MSNBC hailed as the antidote to toxic masculinity, admitted he had an affair with his children's nanny, whom he impregnated. This led to his divorce from his first wife and throws new light on Doug Emhoff's interviews. Listen.
There's too much of toxicity. It's masculine toxicity out there. And strength is how you show your love for people.
As you think about sort of the role of men and pushing for abortion access, is there anything more you would say to them?
It's affecting men's ability to plan their lives.
Laura, look, this is embarrassing. People do terrible things, but it ultimately is a distraction. All of this, RFK's Bear story, the couch, and this. What matters is what you highlighted at the top of the show. This economy in a free fall, and we should be focused on that and policy, not these sides.
Okay, so Democrats are pretty worried that Kamala Harris has never been properly vetted. And I'm thinking that the kind of vague Trump campaign response to the Kamala Harris ascendancy is because they're deliberately waiting for the Democratic convention for Kamala Harris to be crowned as the Democratic nominee. And then we'll start to get all the damaging information about Kamala Harris. And I think it's very likely going to have a great deal to do with corruption. There's a chapter about her in Peter Schweizer's 2020 book, Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Progressive Elite. He writes, the pattern of selective enforcement of laws continued during her tenure as Attorney General. All right, she became romantically involved with Los Angeles Attorney Doug Emhoff. All right, why was she involved with him? Because he impregnated the nanny and got divorced by his first wife. That's why he was on the market.
Masculine toxicity out there.
Kamala's husband got the nanny pregnant.
Can we just give it up again for my husband?
Hit a bear and killed it. I picked up the bear and put him in the back of my van. I was going to skin the bear. I said, let's go put the bear in Central Park. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do?
RFK Jr. and Beargate. Plus...
You want crack?
Fox News alert, an emergency meeting in the White House Situation Room today, where Kamala Harris looks like a nervous wreck. As the Middle East is on the verge of spiraling into a regional war, an American carrier strike group has been rushed into the Gulf as Iran could strike Israel at any moment. American soldiers have already been injured this afternoon in a barrage of rocket attacks on a military base in Iraq. This while Americans woke up at home to a bloodbath.
The Dow opened down more than 1,000 points, fueling fears of a recession amid a...
Okay, so I was all set to major in economics. I just fell in love with economics about age 18, and I devoted most of my spare time to reading about economics between the age of 18 and 22. So I know a little bit, went to UCLA, which had one of the best economics programs in the nation. It was a University of Chicago free market libertarian approach to economics. But to Americans who pay attention to their 401k, to Americans who pay attention to their stock holdings, you're going to feel distinctively less wealthy now after a 1,000 point drop. Now, it may have no greater significance, but for a normal person who has an awareness of his 401k and his stock holdings, he's going to be much less likely to engage in any large purchases or any risky investments at this particularly vulnerable time. And so if that becomes a pattern, then it becomes a self-fulfilling pattern. We have all these signs of an economy heading into recession, which will not redound to the benefit of Kamala Harris.
Global market meltdown. Quadruple digit loss now in the Dow. 1,000 points.
Never been down 1,000 points ever, not even intraday on the NASDAQ.
Is that true?
That is true.
A rise like that is historically a sign that a recession is imminent.
The economy is either in or close to a recession.
What you're seeing right now in the stock market is what Americans have been feeling for the last 3 years. It's just a manifestation of it right now.
Take a deep breath. It is very scary.
Over $1 trillion wiped out as Bidenomics looks like it's blowing up right before the election. Someone must be proud.
That is called Bidenomics.
But sorry to just go back to a point from 5 minutes ago. Why don't people make rational empirical cases for, say, Pakistani immigration into Britain after you had all those groomer gangs exposed, 1,000 English girls who were raped and trafficked by Pakistani groomer gangs, when you have this outrage now about Islamic immigration in Britain, you've got riots. You would think that rational, liberal people who believe in immigration, believe in Islamic immigration, would be making a rational empirical case for it. Why is no one making a case for more Pakistani immigration, for more African immigration? Why don't people try to make a rational empirical case for why it's good that a country becomes more divided, more diverse? All right, we get all these invocations about the beauties of diversity, but why doesn't anyone make an empirical case for it? And you would have to think that the reason no one is making an empirical case for it is because there is no empirical case for it, right? Until someone makes a profound, amply documented empirical case for why Britain has benefited from this substantial amount of Islamic immigration or Indian immigration or African immigration, any type of immigration, all right, unless there are these amply documented, empirically verifiable bases, essays, academic papers, books showing us why this is to Britain's advantage, then if no one can do that, right, then it makes you think maybe it's not so great for Britain to have these massive inflows of immigration. And however bad it is for Britain to have all this immigration, situation in the United States is far worse. Right? We have suffered far more from immigration influx than Great Britain. So Britain's got it bad, but we have it far worse in the United States overall, right? We have a much higher percentage of our population that are recent immigrants compared to what's going on in the United Kingdom. But why isn't anyone making the case for why this is good, right? The case seems to be really shallow, that it's good for the GNP, that we get more low-wage workers, or we get some people with specialized skills. But overall, as we consistently see throughout the First World, that most immigrants stay on welfare for many years, and the next generation of immigrants commits more crime and has lower educational attainment than the first generation of immigrants, right? There are exceptions to this, right? Immigrants from East Asia, right? You get Japanese, Chinese, or Korean immigrants, right? They tend to be highly productive, but immigrants from Northern Europe, they tend to be highly productive. Immigrants from most other places tend to be a net drain on a nation, right? They tend to suck down much more in welfare spending than they contribute to the tax base. So here's a cliche that doesn't probably doesn't hold up, that we've got a conservative arguing that it's good for conservatives to go to university and have to confront an overwhelming left-wing situation, all right, where you've got an institution that's overwhelmingly left-wing. This will be good for you. And Helen Andrews has a commonsensical response. Everybody says this, but in fact, it's deeply unnatural to have the values that are most precious to you in conflict with your entire peer group, right? Eventually, most people either change their values or they change their peer group. This is a profound point, right? Most people don't thrive when there are very few people around them who share their values. In theory, being surrounded by people who disagree with your worldview makes you really good at defending your beliefs. So think of the blessings for those native English who live in areas that become dominated by Islam. They get to get clarity on their values. In practice, it leads to psychological distress beyond what normal humans can cope with. That's true. That's true. If you are surrounded by people who don't share your values, that's far more likely to lead to psychological distress than it is to cognitive clarity. 19.8% of Muslims aged 16 to 74 in the United Kingdom are in full-time employment, as opposed to the native-born English, where it'd be, if it's anything like the United States, it'd be about 60%. So about 25% as many Muslims are in full-time employment compared to the native English. Now, why is this? Probably widespread Islamophobia, racism, and discrimination in British workplaces. Oh, okay. Overall population's only 35%, but what about those who lived in England for, say, 3 generations, right? I'm gonna bet that it's higher than 35%. So I suspect that widespread Islamophobia, racism, and discrimination is not the primary reason why only 19.8% of Muslims 16 to 74 are in full-time employment. I suspect that this low percentage, is fairly common with groups that have a similar average IQ to Muslims in Great Britain. So what would be the average IQ of Muslims in Great Britain? I'm not sure I'm allowed to say it on social media, but there are indications that it'd be below average, right? So groups that have an average IQ of 80, right, I guarantee you that they have much less participation in full-time employment than groups with an average IQ of 100, let alone 120. And groups that have an average IQ of 90, right, they're going to be, once again, much less likely to be fully employed compared to groups with an IQ of 100.
That is called Bidenomics, and we are very proud of Bidenomics.
Trump saying today, stock markets are crashing, job numbers are terrible. We are headed to the World War III, and we have 2 of the most incompetent leaders in history. This is not good. He calls it the Kamala crash. Economists say she detonated the biggest debt bomb in American history when she cast the tie-breaking vote on the $2 trillion spending bill.
The yeas are 50, the nays are 50, the Senate being equally divided. The Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the concurrent resolution as amended is adopted.
Kamala and Biden raided the Treasury, handed out corporate welfare, imported 10 million foreign workers, declared a war on energy, and then patted themselves on the back.
Mr. President, what do you want your legacy for Gen Z to be?
Cure the economy.
2 economic illiterate tax and spend puppets gave a chip company, Intel, $8 billion of your money. And right under their noses, Intel said thanks and laid off 15,000 workers. This AI bubble, the only thing that's keeping the market afloat, that Bidenomics funded with your tax dollars, could pop before the election. Americans are maxed out on credit cards and are taking on second jobs to keep up, but could soon lose both jobs because of the recklessly corrupt mismanagement of our economy, which will probably end up in another big tech bailout. Watch. The election was already about the economy. And if today's bloodbath continues, voters deserve answers from Harris, who hasn't done an interview since June. a lot's happened since June. And as
Okay, so Kamala Harris married Doug Emhoff, a corporate lawyer who was available to be married because he impregnated the nanny, his daughter's teacher, who also moonlighted as his nanny, and she got fired from her teaching job. He is a corporate lawyer. He established his own boutique firm in Los Angeles. He then became a partner in the Los Angeles office of Venable LLP. And he had all sorts of cases coming in and out of his office, including a whole parade of corporations who had matters sitting on the desk of Kamala Harris, California's Attorney General. And what you see is highly selective in the way she exercises her power, frequently for the benefit of her friends, her family, and those who've donated to her. So nutritional supplement companies have faced much government regulation, investigation, right, such as Herbalife, right? There are many reasons to investigate Herbalife, but Kamala Harris never had any interest in investigating Herbalife. Why? Well, Herbalife were clients of her husband's law firm, right? Other supplement companies, Avocare International, Vitamin Shop A, right? So clients represented by her husband's law firm, Kamala Harris, as California's Attorney General, just ignored them, right? Her husband represented Walgreens, and Kamala Harris was not interested in prosecuting a case of Walgreens false advertising. Herbalife was one of her husband's firm's largest clients, and Kamala Harris declined to enforce or to go after Herbalife. And Herbalife threw her a big fundraiser. Right? Prosecutors from Kamala Harris's own Attorney General's office, based out of San Diego, sent her a long memorandum arguing that Herbalife needed to be investigated. They requested additional resources to probe further into the company. Kamala Harris declined to investigate or to provide the resources. And Doug Emhoff just got promoted and got more and more money as his wife declined to investigate his law firm's chief clients.
Even capable of explaining capital markets, labor markets, the global economy? In the book, This Will Not Pass, the authors say while Biden was negotiating with Republicans for $1 trillion in new spending, Kamala piped in out of nowhere and asked for $4 trillion. And Biden dismissed her comment immediately. Imagine if she had gotten her way. She's never had a job in the private sector and doesn't even know why inflation even happens.
What else are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with this. Prices have gone up, and families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up.
Thanks. She doesn't even understand what makes prices go up and down. And if she were...
Yeah, she does not do well when she has to leave her comfortable scripts. Right. If you're really interested in politics, then you got to pay attention to Mark Halperin and his YouTube show.
No okay.
So
thank you for that. Stay with us. David, agree, disagree, annotate. What do you think of Sarah's explanation?
No, I largely agree, but I'd kind of organize it a little differently. I think there's three broad categories she brought up. They're the three categories, more or less, that I wrote about to our clients a couple hours ago. If you're talking about today's market sell-off, there's no question, far and away, number one is the unwind of the yen carry trade in Japan. You do not get a 12.5% drop in the Nikkei because somebody doesn't like Kamala Harris. Okay, there is no doubt that there was a technical issue of the yen being borrowed excessively to leverage financial trades. The yen rallied significantly the last 5 days. This wasn't something that just happened today. And that created a real financial disruption over the weekend. Taiwan dropped a lot, and then it carried over into American markets today. But number two is not totally separate, Mark, on the Venn diagram. This overvaluation, first of all, it didn't come anywhere close to revaluing down to a reasonable level. NVIDIA is now down almost 30% from its high, and it is still trading at 60 times earnings. It is trading at 30 times revenues. Apple was down significantly. It ended up closing less down than it had opened this morning, but still you have Google, Microsoft, some of these big companies that were formerly called Mag 7 that are repricing out of just preposterous valuations. And then I think third is the other point you brought up, the just general skepticism about American economic strength. I think market actors were largely wrong in forecasting a 2023 recession out of the 2022 Fed tightening. And now there's a concern that maybe it's been punted into 25. It doesn't require a recession, meaning 2 quarters of consecutive contraction to have a big impact, because the markets had priced in 13% profit growth next year. And you are not going to get that if you have some.
So the average IQ of Mark Halperin's major guess is like in the 140 range, right? These are very smart people. You get very smart analysis, and you get a lot of the under news, right? What's really going on underneath the polite Victorian gentleman news presentation that you get through the regular news outlets.
Downward movement in economic strength. The jobs report was a part of it. There had been some weakness in ISM, although the ISM services number today came out and it was actually positive, but the last couple months had been negative. There's a mixed bag of economic data. None of it is great, but none of it is screaming that there's an imminent recession. And so I think those 3 factors played in today, but the only broader narrative I want to point out is that the NASDAQ is down 13.5% from where it was almost 4 weeks ago. So this isn't a 1-day or 3-day deal. The NASDAQ had already been correcting. The S&P has a big risk in trying to get into specificity.
Okay, his
she's, wanting to signal to people that she is going to be a good steward of the economy, maybe.
And charitably, but I'm pretty serious about the answer. I think she has a huge peril in trying to explain things that she doesn't understand. And the basement strategy is a brilliant one for her. And if she comes out and has to start talking about monetary policy or the yen carry trade, and she wouldn't get into that granularity, but there's a risk in her touching markets and economic detail where I think it could unwind this momentum. I don't think they'll let her do that. I don't think they should. I think it has to be platitudes, tough on China.
Right. Can you imagine Kamala Harris coming out and speaking about the economy with any specifics or doing an interview about the economy? She'd look like a blithering idiot.
We're going to fix the border, other nonsensical things that aren't attached to any specificity, because I think she has a big risk in trying to get into specificity here. She hasn't done well trying to get into the details of some of these things. There's clips that are out there of her talking about AI, talking about digital storage that are just frightening to listen to. And I think in this case, less is more for her. And yet it's very unlikely that she can get away with that if the economy is worsening, if there's more data coming out. Having to explain the CHIPS Act and why we gave Intel $8.5 billion to fire 15,000 people last week. These are part of the things that are being hung as part of President Biden's resume. It was passed bipartisan. There's a lot of new right people that like
Right. This is David Bahnsen, who's an American portfolio manager and author.
That corporate welfare, but that was a terrible headline, and it's all true. So those are the things that I think her engaging in this economic discussion, she risks having to explain and defend, and I don't think she would end up having to do that very well. There's nothing that the Fed can really do to hurt or help her at this point. I think those things are largely baked in. There's plenty the Fed can do that hurts or helps the reality on the ground into 2025. But these narratives are mostly baked in. And so I think she has asymmetrical risk reward. In a funny way, Sarah brought up the bond yields, and I don't agree that if the 10 years lower, it's a good opportunity, because there's no way those rates are going lower unless it's because of significantly lower expectations for growth, which is, I think, what will happen. And there's not enough time for mortgage borrowers to benefit from it. The lag effect is going to go well past the election. And lowering bond yields at this point is really going to reflect expectations for declining economic growth. That's not going to be a positive story, but nor is it one I'd expect her to be able to fully unpack or explain. I'd be very curious for her to answer what economic team she wanted to bring on. I think markets, I think a lot of centrist and independents, for whatever reason, like hearing the names Larry Summers and Furman and some of these, old kind of Clinton, Obama alumni. She would have to kind of separate herself from some of Team Biden economically. I very much doubt she's going to be willing to do it. And I don't know that there is a real coherent economic philosophy that is yet attached to personnel. And so that she's better off avoiding that subject.
David, before I let Sarah respond, because I think she wants to.
Okay, some good analysis there. I just can't imagine Kamala coming out and speaking spontaneously, but dealing with hostile questions about the economy.
Were elected, she'd have stewardship over the most technologically advanced economy in human history. yet believes when you save things on your computer onto the cloud, it actually goes into the clouds.
No longer are you necessarily keeping those private files in some file cabinet that's locked in the basement of the house. It's on your laptop, and it's then therefore up here in this cloud that exists above us, right? It's no longer in a physical place.
With economics for dummies at her bedside table and Morning Joe on her DVR, does it really even matter what Kamala knows? It doesn't. She's told what to do. This is what she's really all about. Watch.
We have to stay active. And, you know, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke.
This is Kamala's economic philosophy. Equity. She wants to redistribute the wealth and give it to people based on what they look like.
Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. And if you then understand...
Okay, I can't do it. I can't take any more. So let's get some commentary from what's going on with the riots in the United Kingdom. So what I notice are these elite talking points in the United Kingdom, that these riots are springing from misinformation, right? Same with Donald Trump's unexpected victory, 2016, or the unexpected triumph of Brexit. Elites wanted to blame it on misinformation as opposed to recognizing that different people experience the world differently, and that some British policies may well have not been to the benefit of vast swaths of the British people, and that they are reacting rationally to be outraged at these extraordinary amounts of immigration and two-tier policing.
Welcome back. I'm still with Peter Blexley and Ben Habib. Ben, I was going to spend the next few minutes talking about this, but we won't, but I'll better mention it. Labour's dropped the sensible Tory plans, cost-cutting plans to slash the civil...
So now Britain gets the kind of visceral talk radio culture that America has had for decades due to the internet, right? Prior to the explosion of the internet, Britain did not have this kind of visceral public discussion.
Service numbers, so we're going to carry on with this great, unwieldy, inefficient blob that very rarely bother to even go to work. They all work from home. But Baroness Jenkin of Kennington has had to take, or felt it necessary, to table a question to the government as to what the government's policy is on civil servants wearing fetish clothes to work. That's because staff at the Department of Work and Pensions have objected to their trans woman colleague, someone called Saorsa Amathea Tweedale, crazy name, crazy girl, her habit of donning fishnet, skyscraper high heels, chokers and the like to the office. Ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So the policy should be, come to work dressed properly, you idiot. So let's just forget about this. This is just madness. By the way, I noticed Labour are also dropping legislation to stop frontline medical workers, etc., public service workers going on strike quite so much. So we can see we're in the hands of left-wing ideologues who are going to make this country a much worse place. But let's continue with that discussion we were having before the break, because I think it's more important. I mean, your thoughts on a government that, as I said earlier, Peter agrees, Keir Starmer won't confront the truth. He won't. He's trying to mischaracterise what's going on as purely the work of a few right-wing thugs. Yeah. While they are to be deplored, their methods are terrible, but if Keir Starmer thinks just arresting a few EDL thugs will cure this problem, I've got bad news for him. It won't, will it?
No, it won't. And we've got to reject this categorisation as being far right. It's the way to rubbish people who are proud and desirous for the United Kingdom to do well. It's a way to push us aside and win the debate before you've actually had to have the debate. And what I say is this: the key issues here, irrespective of the violence for a moment, the key issues here are British people fed up of the levels of migration that have taken place, the assault on British culture, because instead of assimilating and integrating those who've come to this country, what we've done is create...
Can you imagine the dominant elite perspective in the media and in Britain's institutions is that this kind of rhetoric here by Ben Habib, all right, is what's causing these riots. It's Nigel Farage, all right, it's Tommy Robinson. It's misinformation that's causing these riots rather than people getting fed up with the two-tiered system.
Cultural silos, promoted them and celebrated them. So there's been no positive effort for those who've come here to learn our language, learn our culture, learn our history, buy into British values. None of that. And then, of course, there's the economic issues. Those who come here are a burden on the state. They're not the migrants of the 1980s who came here aspirational, on the front foot, hardworking, wishing to work, make money, pay their taxes, and do well for the country. The kind of migration that we're now experiencing has a very great proportion of dependency about it. They're coming into the country, they're taking benefits, they're taking social housing, they're getting in the queue on the NHS ahead of us, on the queue for social housing ahead of us. And that is...
Yeah, think about the great case that Doug Emhoff is going to have to keep making for abortion, right? You're going to have, many more opportunities to use women for your sexual pleasure, and if something goes wrong, you have to just get rid of the baby, and you're just going to be able to raw dog it much more, right? You're going to be able to get up into your nanny, your kid's teacher, your secretaries, all right? You're just going to have, a good old fuck fest, right? It's just so long as we keep abortion legal, right? Doug Emhoff, definitely the man to make this case. And come on, how much more of this is coming out? Laura Loomer said that a lot more is going to come out on Doug Emhoff. And Laura Loomer is often quite wrong, but sometimes she's ahead of the curve. All right, she's an interesting person, got over 1 million followers on X. All right, her personality or her level of intensity may be discomforting, or some of her tactics may be off-putting, but she does break some stories. All right, back to Talk TV, which also has over 1 million subscribers and is opening up important conversations about immigration flooding into Great Britain.
Sending people apoplectic. What the government needs to recognize, what successive governments over the last 25 years should have recognized, is we've got to slash migration. Both legal and obviously illegal migration must be stopped in the most forceful of manners. And we've got to then integrate those who are here so that we have a settled culture. You can't have a nation state, you can't have a society if it doesn't have a shared culture and a shared language. There are critical components. That's what people are crying out for. A shared, settled, harmonious society where everyone is equal, where ethnic minorities are not put first because they happen to have a particular skin color. Dharma goes on about people being targeted because they have a skin color and a particular faith.
Okay, I want to hear about toxic masculinity and what we can do about it. How can Doug Emhoff show us a better way?
There's too much of toxicity. It's masculine toxicity out there, and we've kind of confused what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, where
the mainstream media is really playing down this story, right? They don't like this story, but there are a lot more stories like this, according to Laura Loomer. And how well will Kamala Harris be able to handle this level of scrutiny?
You've got this trope out there that you've got to be tough and, angry and lash out to be strong. It's just the opposite.
Uh-oh, Kamala's feminist husband got caught being a toxic male. The second gentleman fessed up to cheating on his first wife with the nanny, who he reportedly got pregnant. Senior national correspondent Kevin Cork has the details. Kevin.
Evening, Jesse. So the question remains, obviously, how does Mr. Emhoff reconcile his public statements about so-called toxic masculinity with his behavior that, according to reports, seems to have been, well, toxic? Now, according to the Daily Mail and other sources, the second gentleman reportedly strayed from his then-wife, Kirsten, with a blonde nanny named Najan Naylor, who taught at a private school attended by the couple's 2 children. That affair allegedly happened over a decade and a half ago and, by some accounts, resulted in a pregnancy. A close friend with direct knowledge of the affair and pregnancy told the Daily Mail that no, Naylor did not keep the baby. Now, according to CNN...
So how much do you think she was paid off? I'm suspecting something like $200,000.
And the affair was disclosed to President Biden's vetting committee about 4 years ago before he chose the now VP to run on the 2020 ticket. Obviously, it was not a deal breaker. In a statement, Mr. Emhoff didn't exactly come clean about the alleged affair and pregnancy, but he didn't deny the allegations either, writing this, quote, "During my first marriage, Kirsten and I went through some tough times on account of my actions. I took responsibility, and in the years since, we worked through things as a family and have come out stronger on the other side." Okay. Now, for her part, Ms. Naylor didn't deny the affair or pregnancy when approached by the Daily Mail at her home in the Hamptons, telling the paper, quote, "I'm kind of freaked out right now." As for the VP and the presumptive Democratic nominee, no, we've not heard her address the rumors, nor has her campaign camp, that is.
Right. She hasn't said publicly anything supportive of her husband, as opposed to J.D. Vance's wife, who was speaking out publicly on behalf of her husband.
Responded to questions about it, Jesse.
All right, well, the campaign hasn't really addressed anything.
That's true. Haven't even had a news conference, frankly.
Par for the course. Thank you very much. As it stands today, there are no debates scheduled between Trump and...
Okay, so let's get a little bit more commentary from the United Kingdom.
Well, that's precisely what he's doing. He is promoting people of a particular skin color. He is promoting people of a particular faith to the
Talking about Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
detriment of the majority in this country. And that's what people are objecting to. That's got to stop.
Exactly right, Ben. And the people who are objecting to that are not all far-right thugs. Millions of them are law-abiding citizens who have deep concerns. Let me ask Peter Blexley what he thinks. I mean, what we're talking about here is a fear of Islamification. Now, we have to preface this quite rightly by saying the vast majority of Muslims who live in this country are good British citizens who just want to do the same as the rest of us, feed their kids, put a roof over their heads, hard-working people. That's but we know there's a small minority who want Sharia law. They are not content with trying to fit in with our society. They want to control it. That's what the fear is, isn't it?
Yesterday afternoon, a retired chief superintendent who had a glittering police career rang me up. We've become sort of buddies. And he said, 30 years ago, when he was an inspector or chief inspector and was in charge of community relations at the time, he attended a meeting with two very senior imams who were dressed in white and their caps were embroidered in a very expensive kind of way, which apparently signified their seniority. Okay. And he turned round to my pal at the time and said, ultimately, our aim is to make Britain an Islamic state. Okay, and he was very taken aback by this. We didn't have anywhere near the number of Muslims in the UK that we had then 30 years ago. So he left and he compiled a report for Special Branch because he thought the responsible thing to do, because he regarded that as a very extreme statement at the time, was to get it down on paper, send it to Special Branch, and that it may, in some way, shape or form, have found its way into government channels, which is what you would expect something like that to do. He said, looking by the way this country is going, I fear it probably ended up in the bin.
So it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Ben, let's have a quick look at what's going on in Plymouth right now. I think we've got some clips of the trouble there. Can we show these? OK, coming up, we're heading for the West Country. I was in Devon this weekend myself, and I didn't see anything like this, thank God. So here we go. There you go. So it's definitely starting to kick off a bit. Yep, I think they're throwing things, Pete. Yeah, I mean,
it's a sort of dystopia that's emerging in the United Kingdom. A dystopia, inter-ethnic violence, an inability for the police to control it. We're just sinking, and the Prime Minister and his predecessors just don't appreciate what the problem is, and they're not prepared to get a grip of it.
But I also think, Ben, that he's deliberately politicising this, finding his pantomime villains, saying it's just far-right thugs. Once we arrest them, everything will be all right, and there's no such thing as two-tier policing. There is such a thing as two-tier policing. We can see it all around us, and we know that just arresting these thugs won't solve the problem. You've got 10...
So there's TV Talk now. There's also GB News, Great Britain News, where you've got substantial increase in the freedom of expression on these topics.
Lorraine says Keir Starmer seems to be lighting the touch paper every time he opens his mouth. Lots of people are really not happy at all with the way he's dealing with it. But Liam says, look, I'll be honest, I can't stand Starmer, but I've got to say, when there's anarchy in the country, you need to rally around the Prime Minister and the government. He says the last thing we need right now is more division. Look, talking about right now, let's have a look what is happening in Birmingham tonight.
Community leaders have been speaking to the police as well because...
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
But I think, apologies for the language you're hearing, but a sense of the anger, I think you can hear there.
Yeah, Katie, I think Becky.
I've got to say, because I feel very sad about this whole thing. Because people took to the streets initially with legitimate concerns. So many people would say that their concerns have been ignored for way too long. I think a lot of those concerns are very, very valid. The problem that you've got now is that now this has all been overtaken because like the most horrendous violence that you keep referencing.
What was the one on what were the legitimate concerns that people took to the street on and started the violence on Tuesday in Southport and attacked the mosque? What were the legitimate concerns there?
Well, they would say that they're taking to the, and I'm not a spokesperson for the people that are taking to the streets, but I do know, I listen to people every single day, so I'm listening to what people are saying, that actually what happened in Southport was the light, if you like, that flipped it all off, and people would say that grievances had been caused and festering for a very long time.
Why would a mosque be attacked after
I shall answer that, actually. Many rumours were going around, which I have to be clear, turned out to be untrue. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard and from what I've understood by talking to people, there was an arrest made whilst that vigil was happening. Footage of that arrest.
Yeah, why would people be upset with a population that works at half the rate of the normal population, takes in an enormous amount of welfare and contributes to an enormous amount of social dislocation, in addition to operating all sorts of grooming gangs that turn regular British girls into prostitutes? Like, why would people be upset about that?
Anti-Muslim violence that we saw on our streets. This was not a spontaneous result of misguided policies about multiculturalism or whatever else.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I respect your view. I have a very different view. I think for a lot of people who have watched these protests, or even some of the people who have participated in them, I mean, clearly there is a distinction between what happened in Southport and the underlying concerns in the country. For many people, I remember when Keir Starmer, I think yesterday, said, people have a right to feel safe in this country. Everybody agrees with that. But a lot of British people would say, well, we have a right to feel safe in our country too. And if you're not controlling the borders, if you are allowing 130,000 people into the country illegally and we don't know who they are, if you are presiding over demographic changes that we've never had in the history of...
Okay, why won't someone just make an empirical, rational case for why, when a first world nation becomes more Islamic, it gets better, it gets more free, it gets more prosperous, it develops higher social cohesion and social trust? Why hasn't anyone made the rational empirical case for why becoming more Muslim will make Great Britain, Australia, the United States, Canada, Japan, France, Germany, Portugal, Holland, Norway, Denmark? Why can't anyone make the case that making Norway more Muslim will dramatically improve the quality of life in Norway? I don't know any country that's become, any first world country that's become more Muslim and has been improved by that. I only see social dislocation, reduce social cohesion, social trust. All right, now I may be wrong. So I just want to hear people making the case for why a more Muslim Great Britain is a great thing. Like, lay out the empirical rational case for why a more Muslim France is a great thing. Please make that argument. I'd like to hear it.
Of our country, while also not really integrating people who are coming into the country. If you're letting more criminals onto the streets, releasing them out of prisons, if you're refusing to have serious...
I just can't see any Islamic countries that I want for my country. All right, I can't see any Islamic civilizations currently that I admire. There may well be such Islamic civilizations. I just don't see them right now. All right, so if there are beautiful, prosperous, free, elevated Islamic civilizations, well, please point them out. Like, bring our attention there. Let's remove the ignorance from our eyes and see the beautiful blossoming of Islamic civilization and how it should serve as an inspiration to all of us. I don't see it, but that's because people haven't made the effort to point out these beauties. Like, why is it wonderful to have thousands of women walking around your community just covered head to toe in burqas and other Islamic regalia? Like, why is that a good thing? Just please make the case.
Mature, grown-up conversation about issues that have been very evident in these towns for many years, towns like Telford.
Right, we had all these bogus studies that were promoted by the McKinsey Consulting Group that diversity in the workplace increases profits, and these studies are just bogus, right? what McKinsey put out was just based on lies, all right? It decreases social cohesion, social trust, and it destroys profits, right? It destroys civilization. But among much of the elite, they were perfectly at ease with promoting lies about the beauties of diversity without ever being able to empirically, rationally back it up.
And Rotherham and Rochdale, and you've been called a racist by pointing to the very visible examples of multiculturalism breaking down, and I'm talking about the sexual exploitation of young white girls, then you don't feel safe in this country. And you do feel like there are no-go areas. And I think this incident, yes, there was an element of organisation, and there are far-right activists on the streets causing mayhem. And as I've said repeatedly, if you break the law, you should be arrested, you should be chucked into prison. But let's stop kidding ourselves. This is about the borders. This is about a lack of control. The best thing Keir Starmer and the Labour movement can do right now, if it's serious about governing this country, is regain control of the borders and slow immigration. Those are two things Keir Starmer should be doing right now. If he does that, I suspect these riots and protests will dissipate and Labour could go on to have a successful period in government. But if we're going to sit here pretending that this is actually about the far right rather than this groundswell of opposition on issues where, to be frank, the British people have been lied to and misled, I think this is going to escalate. And that's what I'm worried about. I don't really want this to escalate. And so I think
nobody wants it to escalate. And I do need to reiterate.
I'm not sure that nobody wants it to escalate.
OK, some wrong-uns that are intent on absolute chaos in society because perhaps they will actually stand to benefit for themselves. Yeah, perhaps some of those people want it to escalate. I certainly don't want it to.
All right, there are certain countries such as Pakistan and Iraq and many other Muslim countries that have really high rates of cousin marriage. This tends to decrease IQ. It tends to reduce social cohesion and social trust necessary for a high-functioning post-world country. And I don't see why importing people who have astronomical rates of cousin marriage, and I'd say the same thing. If Jewish immigrants had astronomical rates of cousin marriage, or Australian immigrants had astronomical rates of cousin marriage, then I'd say the country should be concerned and probably should not import these people. So Pakistan has an exceedingly high, about the highest rate of cousin marriage, right, and inbreeding, right? And the biological and physiological and psychological effects of this are well known in some ways. It does reduce IQ, right? It's certainly harmful to a flowering civilization. I don't know why any first world nation would want to import a large number of people from areas with very high rates of cousin marriage. But maybe I'm wrong. Like, make the pragmatic empirical case for the beauties of cousin marriage. Like, let me know, publish those essays, make those YouTube videos, right? Show me, show people who are concerned about immigrants with astronomical rates of cousin marriage, why cousin marriage is a good thing. Like, make the empirical case for inbreeding. Like, if there's a great case to be made for incest, then please make the case for incest. Make the case for inbreeding. Talk about the beauties of Pakistan or Islamic civilization or Nigerian civilization that you want to import to your country. Like, let's hear about why this is so amazing.
To escalate, and as I said repeatedly, previous shows last week, it's never acceptable to attack any place of worship, whether that's a mosque, a synagogue. The growth of feeling across the country, which is mirrored to a lesser extent the rebellion to illegal immigration that's played out across France over the last 12 months. That statement was very quickly deleted, and so many people from a variety of levels of seniority in public life have called for her to lose her job.
It's ridiculous. She's gone out and she's talked to people and she's asked them why they're involved in the process. I had the same over the last few days on Twitter and X, Michelle. People kind of shrieking at me for pointing to wider issues because we're incapable of having a serious, mature discussion about these issues. It's very obvious as to why people feel so frustrated and fed up in this country. It's obvious to everybody except the people who presided over those policies, because if we start to acknowledge what has actually brought us here, and there are some policies that I think James and I would agree on. We've had 30 years, I would argue, of a political revolution that has left a lot of people feeling very alienated, very marginalised in British society. It isn't only to do with issues around migration. But if we start to have that debate, Michelle, about how this elite consensus has gone wrong in this country, well, then the elite class is going to feel threatened. So instead, what we're having is a very managed discussion, a tightly controlled discussion about social media, misinformation, disinformation, individual agitators, Tommy Robinsons, etc. What we're not doing is we're not getting into the more important discussion in this country about how we can fix the underlying problems. They don't want to have that conversation because it will undermine their position. I mean, Already we're talking about expanding definitions of Islamophobia. We're talking about calling millions of people far right. We're talking about shutting down, alternative viewpoints. It looks to me like an elite class that is actually struggling and has a sense that it's losing control. Free speech should not be the first victim of this scandal. Free speech, free expression needs to be protected and preserved. That's how we'll find our...
Okay, that's academic Matt Goodwin. All right, this is probably the most important political commentary of the past few days.
Going on now in the president's race is extremely complicated.
This is from Sunday.
Both candidates right now and both campaigns.
And you can tell he's understating his case.
Both red and blue. There's more tension than there's been during the entire time since the switch was made from Biden to Harris. Tension on the Republican side, which as of now we're going to talk about less tonight because the tension on the Democratic side is more newsworthy right now. In part is caused by President Trump's performance last night in Georgia, doing the exact thing that Republicans don't want him to do, attack the government, different current state of affairs. I see a close race that may end up not being close. I still believe either of these candidates could win this race easily, but more likely it will be close. And I don't think we'll know the contours of the Electoral College map until...
That wasn't the exact quote that I wanted.
Way through this.
Where I agree with Matt is that the establishment, the elite that runs the country and has been destroying the country for, I'd say, longer than 30 years, I'd say more like 45 years, don't want to discuss those issues. And that is why a section of that elite has spent the last 30 years demonizing migrants and demonizing minorities and demonizing Muslims, because it is to distract from the real discussion about the structural issues that...
Okay, so instead of demonizing, like, talk about why they're so awesome. Like, what's the rational empirical case for why these groups are so awesome?
Former Met Police Detective Peter Blexley. Hi there, Peter.
Good evening, Kev. It's a great thrill to be the lunatic in the asylum tonight.
Yeah, exactly. This is the political asylum. Only lunatics are allowed in. I immediately thought of you.
I'd tick that box.
Now, we're going to play some shots of the Prime Minister talking about all this. Now, look.
Okay, I'm just going to try to fast forward and get to the key point here from Mark Halperin. Come on, mate. And now I get the going round and round and round and round. Bloody hell! I'm trying to put on a high quality show here, and this is what you do to me, mate.
Democrats was that if she does not pick Governor Shapiro, because their assumption was not just based on my reporting, but based on what you've seen attribution, not on the record, that Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi prefer Governor Walz under consideration as being subjected to anything like that. And I don't know, is it being driven by Democrats, by Republicans, by ally side and the demand side? What's occurred in the last 5 days or so is really extraordinary. And it's partly extraordinary because I don't know anyone who has an explanation for why it is that in social media, traditional media, amongst interest groups, that he's being gone after pretty hard, very senior Democrats about the vice president. Some saying this, that they will judge her harshly if she does pick him because they think it's a disaster, that it will lead to bigger protests at the kindle of what happens at the end. You look at some of the past Veep stakes where there's a front runner in the mind of the, particularly exuberant. I just don't think he lends himself to that. If it is Governor Shapiro, I think it will be and not make her the automatic nominee on the hope that someone who they felt was stronger could challenge her.
Okay.
Believe that she was not up to the task of beating controversial.
Here we go.
Remember, as President Trump correctly points out, it wasn't that long ago when not just the press, but President Biden privately, President Obama privately, and many other Democrats believed that she was not up to the task of beating Donald Trump. And that's why President Biden, in part, clung to staying on as the nominee. It's why there was a real effort to see if they could get Biden to step down from the nomination and not make her the automatic nominee on the hope that someone who they felt was stronger could challenge her. And because she's been so successful up until now and her team in winning the nomination quickly, in stage managing her public events, there hasn't been very much private and certainly no public discord about what was going on. A few dissenting voices who said, in the pundit class, who said it was a mistake to pick her because you were trading 1 week nominee for another. This has opened up some negativity. And like I said, I'm not sure if Kelly is in play. I'm not sure what the reaction will be. I've already explained what I think the reaction to Wall will be. If it's Shapiro, it's going to be incumbent upon the campaign to really manage that process and to figure out a way to make it positive. He'll have a lot of support, and I've said repeatedly, I think his performance will surprise people, and that there'll be enthusiasm next week in their events in the battleground states and at the convention. But as I said, also this has exposed. This has resurfaced doubts about her judgment and about her ability to make tough decisions. And regarding tough decisions, or rather.
Okay, so a lot of left-wing Antifa activists have been promoting misinformation, which is leading to Islamic anger. So here's a Muslim justifying his anger in the streets by referencing the hoax that Muslim women being targeted in acid attacks by whites. All right, the hoax was made viral by leftists like Antifa activist Nick Laws of Hope Not Hate.
Our fathers have come from a different country to here. We were born here. We are British, Pakistanis, we are Muslims. We will stand here. We will fight against EDL. We will fight our ground. Our innocent Muslim sisters are getting acid attacked. Mosques are getting broken. Everyone should be here. Fuck the EDL. Our fathers.
Lovely. Talk